My wife lied about our savings while planning a secret trip with her lover, so I ghosted her completely and took legal action. She didn't see coming. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I believed in honesty and fairness above everything. I always thought that if you treated people well, if you gave your all and stayed transparent, life would reflect that same integrity back to you. And for a long time, my marriage felt like proof of that belief. My wife, Melissa, seemed perfect on the surface. Loving, responsible, the kind of partner who handled finances with care, remembered birthdays, and made me feel like I could rely on her for anything. She had this calm presence that made our house feel like a home, and I thought we were a team in every sense. Our life wasn't extravagant, but it was stable. I worked hard at my job in tech, putting in long hours to secure a future for us, while Melissa balanced her own career and still managed to make our weekends feel special. I remember planning little surprises for her, dinner reservations on random Tuesdays, weekend getaways I thought she'd enjoy, or just leaving small notes in her bag to make her smile during stressful days. We had conversations about our shared dreams, owning a house by the lake, traveling to Italy, even planning for retirement in a way that let us enjoy life rather than just scrape by. I like to think of us as partners in the truest sense, trusting, supportive, and invested in the same life. For a while, I had no reason to doubt her, but then, subtle things started creeping in, small inconsistencies that gnawed at the back of my mind. A bank statement here that didn't match what she said, a receipt mysteriously missing, little excuses about spending that felt off. When I asked, she'd smile, roll her eyes, and say, "You worry too much, babe. It's nothing." At first, I believed her, chalking it up to my own paranoia. Maybe I was overthinking. But every small lie, every defensive glance, every hushed phone call added a tiny weight on my chest. I didn't know it yet, but those little moments were the first cracks in what I thought was an unshakable foundation. I thought maybe I was imagining things, until everything blew up, and I realized how completely wrong I had been. It started innocently enough, little withdrawals from our joint account that I couldn't immediately explain. At first, I convinced myself I'd simply forgotten some planned expense, or maybe a subscription she'd signed us up for. But then the withdrawals became regular, consistent, and noticeably larger than what I thought we had agreed on for discretionary spending. I began noticing her taking phone calls in private, stepping into the bedroom or the bathroom for long stretches, and suddenly being overly protective of her screen. My gut told me something was off, but every time I tried to ask, she'd brush it off with that same calm smile. "You're stressing over?" "Nothing again, babe." I remember one evening sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, staring at our accounts while she hummed in the background doing dishes. "Melissa, where did this $200 go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, hoping it was just an honest mistake. She turned, feigned confusion, and said, "That? Oh, that's for the car repair fund we set up last month. Didn't you see the notification?" But the thing is, I hadn't, and the way she said it, so confident, so unflustered, made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. Then there were subtle inconsistencies in her stories. She'd mention errands or meetings I hadn't heard of, or say she had plans with friends that I later found out weren't happening. I started noticing a pattern, her tone shifting when she was asked direct questions, her eyes darting just a little too quickly, the faint defensiveness in her voice. The home that had once felt safe now had these small pockets of unease, like shadows creeping into corners I hadn't noticed before. Even still, I hesitated to confront her directly. Part of me whispered that I was imagining things, that maybe I was too controlling, too suspicious. But another part, stronger, louder, was screaming that something was deeply wrong. My trust was being chipped away, bit by bit, like sand slipping through my fingers. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but I knew the calm life I thought I had was quietly unraveling, and I felt powerless to stop it. Something was coming. I just didn't know how fast or how hard it would hit me. I never thought I'd find out like this. It wasn't a conversation, a confession, or a slip of the tongue. It was a flurry of digital breadcrumbs I hadn't even been looking for. I was cleaning up some old emails on my laptop when I stumbled across a confirmation for a luxury resort booking, for two. Except the dates were right in the middle of next month, and the name wasn't mine. My hands froze on the keyboard, and the air in the room felt suddenly thick, almost suffocating. I stared at the screen for a long time, hoping, praying, that this was some mistake. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. I confronted her that night while she was scrolling on her phone, casually sipping wine in our living room. "Melissa, what's this?" I said, sliding the printout across the coffee table. Her eyes flicked up, caught my gaze, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw panic. Or was it guilt? She quickly masked it with a chuckle. "Oh, it's a surprise trip for us," she said, voice light, but a little too practiced. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe her, wanted desperately to be wrong, but something in her tone told me I wasn't. I pressed further. "Us? Who's going with us?" Silence. Then, the words I didn't want to hear. I thought it would be fun. Just a little getaway." But she avoided my eyes, and that hesitation, so subtle, yet so loud, screamed betrayal. My stomach dropped. I could almost feel the life I'd built with her crumbling beneath me. The room, the familiar hum of our apartment, even the warm glow of the lamps. It all felt suddenly alien. For the first time, I realized how meticulous she had been. The withdrawn funds, the private calls, the little lies. Every inconsistency I had brushed off before suddenly made sense. She hadn't just been careless or forgetful. She'd been planning this secretly, systematically, and I'd been completely in the dark. The trust I had built our life on, shattered. I didn't know what to do at that moment. Part of me wanted to scream, throw things, demand answers. Another part, the quieter, colder part, knew I needed to step back, observe, and understand the full extent of what I was dealing with. I had no idea just how deep this betrayal went, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same. And that's when I noticed another detail in the emails, one that made my blood run cold. I spent that night sitting alone in our bedroom, the city light spilling faintly through the blinds, feeling the weight of every lie pressing down on me. The apartment that had always been my sanctuary now felt like a cage. I couldn't stop replaying her words, the practiced calm in her voice, the way she'd avoided looking at me directly. Every shared plan, every savings goal, every little surprise I'd done for her suddenly felt like it had been one-sided, manipulated, carefully curated, while she was hiding something I couldn't yet fully comprehend. My chest ached, not just from anger, but from the raw, hollow emptiness of betrayal. I tried to reach out to her the next morning, but my voice cracked when I said, "Melissa, we need to talk." She shrugged, casually scrolling her phone, like nothing had changed. "I'm busy, okay?" she muttered. The dismissiveness stung more than any harsh words could have. I felt invisible, powerless, and utterly blindsided. How could someone I trusted so completely dismantle our life, piece by piece, without me noticing? I wondered if this was just the tip of the iceberg. I went over everything in my mind, the small withdrawals, the evasive answers, the secretive calls, and a cold realization set in. She had been planning this for months. Every tiny moment I had dismissed as overthinking was a breadcrumb leading me to this exact point. The thought that she was laughing somewhere else, planning a luxurious trip with someone else while I was left in the dark, made my stomach twist. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation, the sense that my loyalty and trust had been taken for granted, exploited even. By mid-afternoon, I had stopped crying, and the anger started to simmer. It was quiet, calculated anger, the kind that doesn't explode, but sharpens every thought, every intention. I knew I had two choices: confront her in a blind rage and risk losing control, or step back, observe, and prepare. I chose the latter, though it felt like walking through fire in silence. As I sat there, drafting mental strategies, I realized something terrifying yet exhilarating. She had underestimated me completely. She didn't know that I was already thinking several steps ahead, quietly documenting everything, and that the tables could turn in ways she'd never anticipate. But I had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything I had left could be gone, and I wasn't ready to show her how much this had already shaken me. I thought I had uncovered the worst of it, but the next morning shattered that illusion completely. I was going through some emails to cross-check dates when I stumbled across a series of messages between Melissa and him. Not just casual texts, detailed plans, hotel confirmations, and even discussions about finances she had secretly diverted over the past several months. My hand shook as I scrolled, the room spinning around me. It wasn't just a getaway. It was a meticulously orchestrated affair, and she had been funneling our money into it without me noticing a single thing. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial, methodical, and deeply calculated. I sat on the edge of our bed, trying to steady my breathing. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic outside, even the soft ticking of the wall clock. It all felt deafening. Every little withdrawal I had questioned before suddenly clicked into place. Every evasive glance, every lie about where she was, every shrug of, "It's nothing," It had all been part of a cover-up I had never imagined. The life I thought I shared with her, the trust, the plans, the savings we had worked toward, was built on a foundation of deception. I tried confronting her again, this time armed with the undeniable proof. Melissa, this isn't a mistake. This isn't a misunderstanding. You've been hiding this from me for months, and it's not just a trip. It's everything. Her face went pale for the first time, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, she would break down. But instead, she laughed. A sharp, nervous laugh. I didn't think you'd ever find out, she muttered, avoiding my gaze. That laugh was worse than any scream or insult could have been. It was the ultimate admission that she believed she was smarter than me, untouchable. In that moment, my emotions collided. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, and a cold, quiet clarity. She had underestimated me completely, and I realized something pivotal. If I reacted emotionally, I would lose everything. But if I stayed calm, strategic, and calculated, I could take control of the situation in a way she would never see coming. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined, but the power had quietly shifted. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about the trip. There was more she had done, something far bigger than I was prepared for. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, staring at the dim glow of the living room lamp, the city outside moving on as if nothing had happened, while my entire world had just collapsed. My chest felt tight, my stomach in knots, and every thought seemed to ricochet between anger and despair. I couldn't stop imagining her there, laughing with him, using the money I had worked so hard to save, while I sat alone, blinds drawn, feeling more powerless than I had ever felt in my life. It was suffocating. The humiliation, the disbelief, the bitter taste of betrayal lodged in every part of me. I tried to talk to friends, but the words felt hollow. She's your wife. Maybe she made a mistake, someone said. Another voice. You don't know the full story yet. Calm down. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to just break. But even that felt impossible. The weight of everything she had done, the realization that I had been deceived so thoroughly, pushed me to my absolute limit. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for believing that love and honesty were enough to protect us. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and for the first time, considered giving up entirely, letting her have everything, letting her win, letting my life spiral. But even in that despair, a spark flickered. I remembered the meticulous planning she had put into this, and I realized that if I allowed myself to be swept away by emotion, she would have won completely. I couldn't let her win. The apartment, once a haven, now felt like a prison of betrayal. The smell of her perfume lingered faintly in the air. The hum of the refrigerator mocked the silence, and every small sound made my heart jump. Yet beneath the despair, a quiet determination began to form. I needed a plan. I needed leverage. I needed to regain control. And in that moment of utter rock bottom, as tears blurred my vision and anger simmered beneath exhaustion, I made a silent promise to myself. She would never see what was coming. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I ghosted her completely. No calls, no texts, no confrontations. She had taken me for granted, manipulated my trust, and underestimated me. And I realized the only way to regain control was to step back, stay silent, and let her unravel on her own. I watched her attempts to reach me from a distance, missed calls, vague messages, and hesitant knocks at the door. And every one of them felt like a small victory. She had assumed that my love or anger would pull me back into the chaos, but I had learned that silence could be far more powerful than yelling. While she panicked, I started quietly documenting everything. Bank statements, receipts, emails, and even screenshots of messages between her and him. I kept meticulous records. Every little inconsistency, every lie, every betrayal was carefully noted. I felt a strange clarity in it all. My heartbreak was still raw, but my mind had become a machine of logic and strategy. I knew that when the time came, I could use this evidence not just to protect myself financially, but to make her finally confront the consequences of her actions. Living in the same apartment while she was oblivious to the storm I was quietly brewing was surreal. Every mundane noise, the hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, her footsteps in the hallway, reminded me that she was living her normal life, unaware of how close she was to losing everything. And yet, that gave me a twisted sense of calm. She thought she was in control, but the power had already shifted. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was calculating, observing, and preparing. Even as I went through the motions of my day, work emails, cooking meals, answering colleagues. I felt a growing sense of satisfaction. For once, I was not the naive, trusting husband. I was patient. I was methodical. And every day of her anxiety without my presence sharpened my resolve. She didn't know it yet, but her carefully constructed deception had placed her squarely in my hands. And that's when I realized silence could hurt more than confrontation ever could. Days passed, and her panic grew in ways I hadn't expected. I could see it in the subtle ways she moved around the apartment, hesitant footsteps, glances over her shoulder, hurriedly closing apps when I entered the room. She started leaving vague notes. "We need to talk," or "Call me when you're free." Each one made my chest tighten, but I said nothing. I had learned that my silence was far more potent than any argument or confrontation. Every missed call, every unanswered message added to her anxiety, and watching her unravel without me needing to act was strangely satisfying. She tried to bait me into interaction. "I just want to explain," she said one evening, voice quivering. I didn't respond, just continued scrolling through emails, pretending not to hear. The tension in the air was almost physical. The apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing in, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a countdown. I could feel her frustration building, and I knew she had no idea that I was quietly documenting everything, recording every lie, every detail of her betrayal. At work, I went about my day normally, but my mind was constantly calculating. How far would she go to get my attention? How desperate would she become before realizing that her carefully constructed facade was unraveling? I could almost anticipate her next moves, texts, half-hearted apologies, attempts at emotional manipulation. But I stayed one step ahead, cold, composed, and patient. By the fifth day, the tension had reached a breaking point. I could hear her pacing at night, whispering to herself, muttering fragments of guilt and frustration. Every sound she made, every frantic movement, was a reminder of the control I had quietly regained. I felt a grim satisfaction, but also an underlying fear. If I miscalculated even slightly, she could still undo everything. And then, in the middle of the night, I noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly on the counter, messages from him. The way she reacted to them, the sheer desperation in her tone, confirmed it. She thought she could control everything, but she had no idea just how trapped she really was. By the next morning, I knew it was time to take concrete action. Silence had given me control, but I needed more than psychological leverage. I needed legal protection and a strategy that she could never anticipate. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, carefully phrasing the situation to get every option laid out. Bank statements, receipts, email records, even screenshots of messages between her and him. I brought it all. Each piece of evidence added weight, proof of a pattern of deception that I could use to secure my finances and potentially hold her accountable. Sitting in the lawyer's office, I felt a strange mix of relief and determination. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt like I was regaining control, not through anger or confrontation, but through calculated action. The lawyer explained exactly what I could do: freeze shared accounts, protect assets, and pursue restitution if necessary. I took notes meticulously, imagining the day she would finally realize the full consequences of her actions. Back at home, I continued my silent observation. Melissa was becoming more erratic, leaving traces of her anxiety in the form of hurried notes, impulsive spending, and whispered conversations on the phone. I could see the cracks widening, her facade of control crumbling as she scrambled to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Each small panic attack she had, each misstep she made, gave me confidence that the plan I was forming was solid. Even as I documented everything and coordinated legal steps, I maintained a calm, normal exterior, cooking meals, answering work emails, carrying on as if nothing was wrong. It was all part of the strategy. She couldn't suspect that every word, every action, every misstep she made was being quietly noted and logged. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and I knew the day of reckoning was coming, one she would never see coming. As night fell, I stared at the city skyline through the window, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. She had thought she was untouchable, and I realized she couldn't have been more wrong. The day finally came when everything I had quietly prepared came to fruition. I served the legal papers, step by step, with the lawyer coordinating each move to ensure there was no loophole, no chance for her to wiggle out. When Melissa finally realized what was happening, her face went pale. A mixture of shock, fear, and disbelief that I had been one step ahead the entire time. I watched her, calm and composed, while the reality of her choices finally hit her. For once, she was speechless. She tried to argue, to charm, to manipulate the situation with half-hearted apologies. "Please, we can fix this. I didn't mean, she started, her voice trembling. I stopped her mid-sentence, my tone measured and cold. You've already made your choices, Melissa. Now it's time to face the consequences. The irony of it all was intoxicating. She had spent months thinking she was in control, while I had been quietly constructing a plan that she never even imagined. I laid out the evidence calmly. The withdrawals, the secret trips, the messages, every little lie meticulously recorded. She tried to interject, to minimize her actions, but the proof was undeniable. Every single manipulation, every deception, every calculated betrayal she had committed was documented in black and white. The room felt heavy with tension, the air almost tangible, as the weight of her deceit finally settled around her. Watching her panic, seeing the mask she wore crumble piece by piece, gave me a strange sense of relief. I wasn't gloating. Well, maybe a little. But mostly, I felt vindicated. For months, I had been the one blindsided, manipulated, and humiliated. Now, the scales had shifted, and she was powerless. And just when I thought the shock had reached its peak, she blurted out something I hadn't expected. A desperate plea that only confirmed how far she had underestimated me. By the end of that week, the legal actions were finalized. Our joint accounts were secured, the money she had secretly siphoned was reclaimed, and any attempt she made to manipulate or intimidate me was nullified by the documentation I had gathered. Watching her finally face the consequences of her choices, finally realizing that her carefully constructed lies had crumbled, was surreal. She had thought she was untouchable, that she could have her affair, her secret trips, and her control over me. But every step she had taken had led directly to this moment of reckoning. Melissa tried one last desperate attempt at negotiation, pleading for leniency, offering apologies she clearly didn't mean, promising to make things right. I listened quietly, my emotions steady, my mind clear. I've already protected myself, I said simply. It's too late for apologies. Actions have consequences. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent months thinking she was manipulating me, while I had been quietly building the leverage that ensured I could never be hurt again. I reflected on the months of betrayal, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, and the heartbreak. And for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. The pain was real, yes, but so was the justice I had orchestrated. She could no longer dictate my life, control my emotions, or threaten my financial security. The power dynamic had reversed completely, and it was satisfying in a way that words can't fully capture. I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph, not gloating, not cruelly savoring her pain, but acknowledging the strength it took to survive this betrayal and turn it into empowerment. I realized that the humiliation, the anger, and the heartbreak had all been catalysts, forcing me to reclaim control and protect what was rightfully mine. And as she finally left my life, defeated and exposed, I felt a strange mix of relief and vindication. The woman who had deceived me for months had learned, the hard way, that some betrayals are met with consequences far beyond what anyone could anticipate. The days after everything settled were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The apartment, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now felt like my sanctuary again. I could breathe, think, and move without the constant weight of betrayal pressing down on me. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to reflect on what I had been through. Not just the deception, the heartbreak, and the humiliation, but the strength, patience, and clarity I had discovered within myself. I realized that surviving this wasn't just about reclaiming money or exposing lies. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self. I started rebuilding, slowly and intentionally. Mornings were spent exercising, evenings working on projects I had neglected, weekends exploring hobbies that had fallen by the wayside. I found comfort in small routines, in spaces that reminded me who I was before the betrayal. And though memories of Melissa and her lies would occasionally surface, they no longer had power over me. I had transformed the rage and heartbreak into a quiet, steady confidence that I could navigate any storm life threw at me. People around me noticed the change. Friends remarked that I seemed lighter, calmer, more grounded. I didn't tell them everything. Some wounds are too raw for casual conversation. But I felt an inner peace that no betrayal could touch. I had learned that empowerment isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet act of standing tall after someone has tried to tear you down. And as for Melissa, I occasionally caught glimpses of the consequences of her actions. Friends hinting at her struggles, murmurs of judgment. But I felt no satisfaction in her downfall. The real victory was mine. My autonomy, my security, and my renewed self-respect. I had weathered the storm, endured the betrayal, and emerged not broken, but stronger. In the end, I understood that true closure doesn't come from revenge or punishment. It comes from reclaiming your own life and refusing to let someone else define your worth. I could finally move forward, free of manipulation, fear, and lies. And that freedom, more than anything, was priceless.